Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirkhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 13 running back rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm covering all topics related to the running back position, beginning with matchups. We're going to identify the most advantageous matchups going into Week 13 based on how many fantasy points defenses have allowed to opposing running backs between Week 6 through 12. Then we'll go ahead and transition into talking about my top 40 running back rankings, as I'll share with you guys my thought process and opinions on each individual player. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, you could travel down to the description of the video. Down there, we have timestamps available. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, of course, be sure to subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification button. Besides the daily content, we're also live streaming every single day. Later tonight, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I'll be live here on the channel. If you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. I'm more than happy to help. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about matchups going into Week 13. As we can see, based on statistics allowed throughout Week 6 through 12, because obviously we want to take into consideration the most recent performances against these defenses rather than what happened in the first month of the season. Based on the findings as of weeks 6 through 12, the last 6 to 7 games for these teams, the Giants, Saints, Jaguars, Commanders, Panthers, Cowboys, etc. are the most advantageous matchups going into the given week. Therefore, we're firing up our running back. So Rico Dowdle, who's coming off a great performance in which he had 22 total touches, takes on the Giants on Thursday night, has an opportunity at greatness. We have the New Orleans Saints, Kyren Williams, coming off a week in which he finally found the end zone once again, now has an opportunity of taking advantage of this upcoming matchup. The Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, even though Joe Mixon, this most recent performance against the Tennessee Titans was a no-show, he has an opportunity to get back on track against the Jaguars. We'll talk about these matchups at an even greater extent when we talk about these players on an individual basis, but just wanted to go ahead and give you guys the outlook in terms of what we could potentially anticipate to see. Now, in regards to some of the more disadvantageous matchups going into Week 13, of course, we have the Miami Dolphins, Philadelphia Eagles, Chiefs, Ravens, and the Vikings, who have been in this conversation all season long. They are stopping opposing running backs. They're not allowing very many yards, much less touchdowns, and because of this overall circumstance, we oftentimes want to avoid playing our running backs within these matchups. Outside of a touchdown experience, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, if you don't score a touchdown as a running back, you're not eclipsing more than 10 fantasy points and a half PPR. That has been a consistent factor the entire season. But either way, I just wanted to go ahead and represent some of the more disadvantageous matchups as we approach Week 13. Now, before we get into talking about my top 40 running back rankings, a reminder, down in the description, there's a link heading on over to Underdog. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew today and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only are you going to be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, entail the upcoming picks for this upcoming Thursday, but you're going to get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, includes flex in order to help you set your lineup. So for those of you who are interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility based on your current location. If in fact you are not eligible based on your current location, or if you've used my code or somebody else's code in the past seasons, of course, you can always find the rankings available via Patreon, link down in the description. Also, do not forget, because Thanksgiving is just ahead, there are going to be a lot of promos available via Underdog for upcoming picks. Besides the free pick in terms of the new customer special, there are going to be even more promos that release this upcoming Wednesday and beyond going into this exciting weekend. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's talk about our top 40 running backs, beginning with our number one. Yeah, Saquon Barkley is taking over the league, and he's going to continue to maintain as the number one, considering the damage that he is causing to opposing defenses. Just this last week, the Los Angeles Rams were quite literally the most difficult matchup at the running back position in terms of fantasy points per game allowed. And then Saquon Barkley came into town, ran for 255 yards, which amongst all running backs in NFL history, that is the 9th most rushing yards in a singular game. And then on top of that, in terms of total yards that he accumulated within the game, 302, that's the 20th most single game total yards by a running back in NFL history. He continues to break records. He set like singles games franchise records for the Philadelphia Eagles. He continued to dominate, and he dog walked the Los Angeles Rams defense, and now has an opportunity of doing so to the Baltimore defense, which again, this Baltimore defense has played relatively well over the course of this entire season, so it may be a difficult matchup, but we're firing up Saquon Barkley. Like we've talked about over the course of the last couple weeks, in games in which Saquon Barkley finds the end zone, he is an unstoppable force. Thus far this season, in the 6 games in which he has scored touchdowns, he's averaging 33 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. In the 5 games in which he has not scored touchdowns, because of course Jalen Hurts is scoring them, he's averaging 10.9 fantasy points. Expecting a huge week here, hopefully for another consecutive game. Number 2, we have Achane. Speaking of consecutive games in which he's popping off, I mean, look, with Tua Tagovailoa under center, Achane is averaging 20.37 half PPR fantasy points per game. His most recent performances, the 7 games with Tua, 6 of those 7 games have consisted of 18.5 or more fantasy points. He's dominating, coming off of a week in which he had only 3 receptions, sure, but 2 receiving touchdowns. As long as he is getting the implementation within the receiving game, his upside continues to rise. Amongst all running backs thus far this season, he's number 1 in terms of receiving touchdowns, and as long as he continues to be prioritized down in the red zone, expect him to find success success this upcoming Thursday night, taking on the Green Bay Packers. The Packers defense cannot stop the run. They're allowing 4.34 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs since week 6 and 14.33 fantasy points per game in that category in terms of just rushing statistics alone, not to take into account what Achane can deliver through the receiving game. Recently, we have seen the last 5 offenses against the Green Bay Packers, their running backs accumulate over 100 rushing yards in every single game. I mean, again, LA Rams, Houston, Detroit, Chicago, etc. We've seen fantastic performances. Devon Achane's next man up. Number 3, taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, is Joe Mixon. Look, even though Joe Mixon is coming off of only his second game this season in which he has produced less than 100 total rushing yards, we're expecting him to get back on track. I mean, this was a game in which not only did he not surpass 100 total yards, but he didn't score a touchdown, which he hadn't done all season long. Every single game had accompanied at least one singular touchdown. But now we have an opportunity to get back on track. Everything that he wasn't able to accomplish last week is hopefully going to, fold over to this upcoming week and find himself finding even more potential for upside. Taking on the third best matchup at the position, the Jacksonville Jaguars are allowing 19.55 fantasy points per game on the ground alone, rushing yards and rushing touchdowns, and 4.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. The most recent matchups against the Jaguars: Detroit, Minnesota, Philadelphia, and Green Bay. Every single one of those backfields combined for a total of 140 or more rushing yards against them in the last 4 games. Moving on to our number 4. Coming off of the bye week is Bijan Robinson. Look, prior to this most recent blowout in week 11 in which they got completely handled by the Denver Broncos and Bijan Robinson wasn't able to find much success. I mean, the offense as a whole, they pulled Kirk Cousins in the 4th quarter. But prior to that overall experience, the 5 prior games, he had gone for a 5-game streak of 100 total yards or more. Again, the guy was dominating on a weekly basis. He has an opportunity of getting back on track this week after the bye week, ready to go healthy, taking on the Los Angeles Chargers, who are allowing 5.11 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs since week 6. Obviously, the efforts of Justice Hill and, of course, Derrick Henry last night certainly made a huge difference in the overall category, but nonetheless, this team cannot stop the run. Sure, they may not give up very many touchdowns to opposing running backs as their red zone defense has played well this season, but I'm anticipating that Bijan Robinson's going to get the yards and hopefully fall into the end zone once again this week. Number 5, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who continues to play incredibly well every single week. Now, going into this upcoming Thursday's game, because it's a short week and David Montgomery sustained a shoulder injury in this most recent Sunday performance against the Indianapolis Colts, we have heard from the head coach, Dan Campbell of the Detroit Lions, that they do anticipate to see David Montgomery at a full capacity. But in any event in which he is going to be potentially limited, it's only going to continue to increase the potential for upside for Jahmyr Gibbs. Again, a player that as of the last 11 games has scored 11 touchdowns this season. He's been able to get himself 74 or more total yards every single game this year. Takes on the Bears defense, who are allowing 4.87 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, nearly 16 fantasy points per game on the ground, and have most recently allowed the following performances to opposing backfields: Arizona 205, 2 touchdowns. New England 120 on the ground. Green Bay 93 and a touchdown. Minnesota 125 and a touchdown. If it wasn't for the Aaron Jones fumble, would have been 125 and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have himself a fantastic performance on Thursday morning. Moving on to our number 6 to begin the 8th tier, we have Derrick Henry. Okay, so yesterday, unfortunately, the streak ended. The 11-game streak of an anytime touchdown ended last night because, of course, a holding call brought back a Derrick Henry touchdown. The following play, Lamar Jackson rushes in a touchdown. It's like the Undertaker streak being broken, losing to Brock Lesnar at Mania. So, obviously, we're upset. But going into this upcoming week, we're going to hope that he's going to get back on track, taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, anytime Derrick Henry is given ample opportunity, he doesn't even need to find a touchdown. The yardage alone is going to carry him. Thus far this season, in games in which he's been given 16 or more touches, again, he's done that in 9 of the last 12 games. In 8 of those 9 games in which he's getting 16 or more touches, he's got himself 95 or more total yards. Taking on the Philadelphia Eagles isn't the easiest matchup of the week, but it certainly is expected to be the highest scoring going into this upcoming weekend, I can assure you that. But with a run-heavy offense on both sides, the clock will definitely disappear quicker than we anticipate. Moving on to our number 7, we have Josh Jacobs, who is coming off of an incredible game of 106 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, thanks to the overall efforts of Brandon Allen. It granted the Green Bay Packers many short field opportunities in which they got Josh Jacobs into the mix on the goal line. Josh Jacobs, for 7 consecutive weeks, has been able to total 90 or more total yards. He has scored 8 touchdowns in the last 7 total games. Takes on the Dolphins, that as of right now is the most difficult matchup at the running back position. But like we saw last week, Saquon Barkley took on the most difficult matchup. He went for 255 yards. It's just a matter of which running backs have taken on these defenses as of late. I anticipate Josh Jacobs to continue his streak of success on Thursday night. Chase Brown, coming off the bye week, is our number 8. Look, Chase Brown, regardless of which defense he takes on, the fact of the matter is, in the absence of Zach Moss, he has been able to dominate because of the volume of opportunity they continue to send in his direction. In the last 3 games, his total touches has been 32, 22, and 27, coming off of fantasy point performances in a half PPR of 24.2, 17.9, and 16.8. He continues to dominate because of the receiving workload. Over the course of the last 3 games, averaging 7.7 targets, 6.3 receptions, and 49 receiving yards per game. Taking on the Steelers is a piece of cake. Top 10 matchup, allowing nearly 17 fantasy points per game on the ground, 4.19 yards per carry. If you accompany that with the potential of his receiving upside, expect another huge performance here from Chase Brown. Number 9, we have the thumbnail of today's episode, Breece Hall. Look, I would believe that Breece Hall could very easily have himself a 20-plus point performance and finish as an S-tier running back by the end of the week, in the event in which he is given ample opportunity. Thus far this season, in games in which he has been given 20 or more touches, he's averaging 20 fantasy points per game. And that's happened 5 separate times this season. Now, really, a lot of that is going to be a matter of, is he going to be given the receiving upside? Because in games in which he's been given 5 or more receptions this year, he's averaging 21.36 half PPR fantasy points per game. If they're going to give him the involvement within the receiving game to find himself upside within the category, expect him to be a top 10 performer at base minimum. Taking on the Seattle Seahawks, sure, they did stop James Conner this most recent performance, but James Conner also ate within the receiving game. And hopefully this Jets offense coming off of the bye week is going to recalibrate and find themselves continuing to give the ball to Breece Hall in order to find success. Again, the Seattle Seahawks aren't a great run-stopping defense. They're still allowing 5.1 yards per carry to opposing running backs and 14.4 fantasy points per game on the ground since week 6. Therefore, Breece Hall, a fantastic play within the upcoming performance. Moving on to our number 10. We have Christian McCaffrey. I don't remember ranking Christian McCaffrey ever this low unless he was actually injured. But in this case, it's purely just a matter of, is Brock Purdy going to be available? Obviously, Kyle Shanahan yesterday within his press conference on Monday did mention that Brock Purdy is feeling healthier and we're going to keep monitoring him as we go throughout the week. If Brock Purdy is not going to be available, this is pretty much where I'm going to have Christian McCaffrey. This is under the assumption that Brock Purdy doesn't play. If Purdy's in the lineup, I would put Christian McCaffrey back in the top 5 conversation because that's where he belongs. Now, even though thus far this season, in the last 3 games, he's been highly inefficient in terms of his rushing potential, only 3.47 yards per carry and 2.47 yards after contact per attempt. In comparison to the year prior in 2023, I mean, again, 2023, he was averaging 5.37 yards per carry. So nearly 2 yards per carry on average less this season. And of course, 3.42 yards after contact per attempt, which is nearly a yard in that overall category as well. So Christian McCaffrey, a lesser rusher because of the injury that he sustained this offseason. And hopefully the receiving game will still keep him afloat considering he's averaging over 10 yards per reception. But it's going to purely be a matter of, is Brock Purdy available to help his value going into this week? Moving on to our number 11, Bucky Irving, who did exactly what we anticipated and that much more. Besides finding his success on the ground, 12 carries for 87 and a rushing touchdown, found himself being the primary benefactor of the receiving game. Typically, it's Rachaad White, but in this case, Bucky Irving, 6 targets, 6 catches, 64 receiving yards, played incredibly well. And this is the first time all season in which Bucky Irving outsnapped Rachaad White within a singular game. 52% in comparison to Rachaad White's 49% of the offensive snaps. Considering the positive game script in which they were leading for majority of the game, they wanted Bucky Irving in the game because he's the primary running back, the rusher of this offense. Going forward, we're going to continue to see more opportunities go in his direction. If it wasn't for the fact that, Rachaad White had himself a rushing touchdown and Sean Tucker, there could have been a possibility in which Bucky Irving goes for 35 fantasy points this most recent week. Hopefully he has the opportunity of accomplishing that this upcoming week, taking on the Carolina Panthers, a top 5 matchup at the position, allowing over 5 yards per carry on average. I'm anticipating continued success from our rookie running back here. Moving on to our number 12, we have Kyren Williams. Look, Kyren Williams and the rushing attack, quite frankly, not only the running attack, but the passing attack of the LA Rams was potent this most recent performance against the Philadelphia Eagles, who on all metrics are an elite defense over the course of this entire season. Now, if in fact we're going to get Rob Havenstein back, the starting right tackle, and we're going to get healthy up front, Kyren Williams taking on the New Orleans Saints should be a cakewalk, especially considering the Saints are allowing the second most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs on the ground since week 6, 21.48, and averaging 5.31 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. My expectation is that Kyren Williams should find immediate success, especially considering the Los Angeles Rams offense totaled the most yards against the Eagles that any team has over the course of the season, 481 total offensive yards. If they're able to do that against the Eagles' elite defense, imagine what they're able to accomplish against a defense like the New Orleans Saints. Moving on to our number 13, we have James Cook. Look, James Cook has continued to score touchdowns all season long, and that's what keeps him in this conversation. 11 touchdowns scored in the last 10 games, whether it's on the ground, through the air. The fact that he has been as efficient, he has been 4.3 yards per carry on average, getting himself all the red zone utilization. That's all that matters. If Brock Purdy's going to miss this game, expect a James Cook performance that looks eerily similar as to what Josh Jacobs did to the 49ers this most recent performance. Expect a game in which, in the absence of Brock Purdy, it will be a one-sided affair where the running back position is just eating. Now, in the event in which Brock Purdy plays, this is going to be a competitive matchup. James Cook will probably sit here at number 13, and it'll be balanced. Again, the 49ers aren't the best run-stopping defense either. Sure, they're only allowing 3.57 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs, but they're still allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game since week 6. Green Bay obviously dominated this most recent performance, but even prior to that, Seattle 57 and a touchdown, Tampa Bay 104 and a touchdown, Dallas 46 and a touchdown, Kansas City 101 and 2 touchdowns. So this run-stop defense typically has been great in the past, has not been the case as of late. Number 14, we have Kenneth Walker. Look, Kenneth Walker and the team for some reason insists on giving him, the vast majority of overall touches, 20 total touches this most recent performance, but then insists on also giving Zach Charbonnet goal line rushing attempts. I honestly don't understand the entire thought process there, but they ended up giving 2 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line to Zach Charbonnet. He was not able to find the end zone on either of those overall opportunities. You give those to Kenneth Walker, he finds the end zone and is an even better fantasy point producer. Now, this week they take on the Jets. In the event in which the Jets offense doesn't show up once again and they flounder, expect this to be a one-sided affair in a positive game script in which they're running the ball for majority of the second half and completely annihilating the Jets defense. Again, they're allowing the 12th most fantasy points per game on the ground to opposing running backs. They've allowed 125 or more rushing yards and a rushing touchdown to each backfield in the last 3 games. The Jets defense hasn't been able to stop a soul in quite a while. Moving on to our number 15, we have David Montgomery. Even with the sustained injury on Sunday, still came away with 14.8 fantasy points. Again, he has stable fantasy points every single week because he is guaranteed to score a touchdown. Has scored a touchdown in 9 of the last 11 games. Has scored over 11 fantasy points in 10 of the last 11 games. As long as the opportunities continue to go in his direction, as long as he's healthy and ready to go by Thursday morning, I'm expecting him to continue his successful streak against the Chicago Bears. Moving on to our number 16, we have Jonathan Taylor. Now, many of you have asked me over the course of the last couple of days, whether it be the live stream, the comment section, Andrew, is Jonathan Taylor washed? Well, look, since Anthony Richardson has come back to being the starting quarterback, we have all noticed that Jonathan Taylor's only averaging 2.63 yards per carry on average, has not found the end zone, and has not been fantasy relevant within the receiving game. So all of the overall categories in which he is typically great in terms of breakout runs, red zone rushing touchdowns, receiving upside, has all been eliminated. But a lot of you guys are saying, is Jonathan Taylor cooked? It's really just the offensive line that as of late has not played well. When we talk about what happened in week 10, the offensive line was allowing 4.1 yards before contact per attempt in comparison to week 11, which was 0.7, and week 12, 1.5. The offensive line has not been able to produce well, and because of that, it isn't giving Jonathan Taylor the opportunities to break out runs because he's immediately finding contact within the backfield as the front 7 of the defenses are lighting up their offensive line. So if we're going to go ahead and expect Jonathan Taylor to find success this week, it's only going to be because we expect the offensive line to find success. They're taking on the Patriots, which again is the 10th best matchup. The Patriots are allowing 4.69 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. Miami only just ran for 65 rushing yards. LA Rams 107, Tennessee 150, and the New York Jets 112. We're going to hope that this offensive line gets back on track in order to elevate Jonathan Taylor back to his normal state and hopefully find him in the end zone. Moving on to our number 17, we have Alvin Kamara. Again, outside of a full PPR scoring format where you're able to get yourself, a touchdown worth of points just off of receptions alone, outside of that kind of a format, in a half PPR, we are super reliant on Alvin Kamara finding the end zone. He has yet to score a touchdown since week 6, and because of the overall efforts of Taysom Hill and how that's going to continue to transpire within this offense going into this week, I would anticipate that Alvin Kamara, again, very much so contingent on whether or not he finds the end zone. His yardage as a whole and receptions are going to keep the baseline pretty strong, and that's why I have him at number 17, but it's just purely a matter of, is he going to be given the opportunity, or are they going to be looking in the direction of Taysom Hill to find the end zone? Moving on to our number 18, we have Aaron Jones, who's coming off of a week in which he fumbled the ball on the 1-yard line. If it wasn't for that case, he ends up scoring over 20 fantasy points, has himself 2 touchdowns, and a great overall week. Now, going into this upcoming weekend's performance against the Arizona Cardinals, that defense has played incredibly well and has been really solid in terms of stopping opposing running backs as of late. It's purely just going to be a matter of, are they going to be able to continue to give Aaron Jones the red zone opportunities? And really, are they going to continue to look towards him in the receiving game? If both of those categories are going to stay present within his overall workload, expect him to be a solid top 20 performer once again this week. Number 19, we have Chuba Hubbard. Look, Chuba Hubbard has played incredibly well all season long. We know that. And this most recent week against the Kansas City Chiefs, I told you guys, it's going to be a very difficult matchup, and we talked about it early on Sunday morning prior to the games kicking off. I said that if Chuba Hubbard doesn't score a touchdown, he is not eclipsing 10 fantasy points. And if it wasn't for the fantasy gods blessing us with a defensive pass interference that led to the Carolina Panthers getting an opportunity on the 1-yard line, Chuba Hubbard would have been completely cooked. But we got the opportunity. He scored his rushing touchdown. He eclipsed over 10 fantasy points, which we love to see. This week, a far more advantageous matchup, taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, allowing nearly 12 fantasy points per game on the ground and nearly 4.5 yards per carry on average to opposing running backs. This is Dave Canales, the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, having a revenge game versus his former team. He was the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season. With Jonathan Brooks not being much of a factor as of this current moment in time, Chuba Hubbard still an auto start going into the matchup. Moving on to our number 20, we have Tony Pollard. Now look, Tony Pollard with and without Tyjae Spears is two different monsters. In games in which he is with Tyjae Spears, only 10.6 fantasy points per game and 16.3 touches per game. In comparison, into the 5 games this season in which he has played without Tyjae Spears, 14.86 fantasy points per game, so nearly 4 points per game more on average, and 23.8 touches per game, which again is 7 more touches on average on a per game basis. Therefore, if we're going to be in a situation in which we're going to have Tyjae Spears back, expect a lesser version of Tony Pollard. Even though they do take on the 4th best matchup at the position, we have most recently seen running backs combined for, Dallas 92 on the ground, Philadelphia 189, 2 touchdowns, Pittsburgh 133 and a touchdown against Washington. The New York Giants went for 99 rushing yards, Chicago 135, 2 touchdowns. Even though we have seen running backs dominate against the Washington front 7 in terms of running the ball, if Tony Pollard isn't going to be exposed to the greater range of opportunity that he typically is due to the presence of Tyjae Spears, that's pretty much why I have him at number 20. Number 21, we have Rachaad White, who continues to score touchdowns, but really, it's just a matter of these touchdowns saving his weekly performances. If it wasn't for the fact that he is on a 5 consecutive streak of scoring touchdowns, we would be in a situation in which he is not even able to break the top 24. But this most recent week, obviously, like I talked about earlier with Bucky Irving, this was the first game in which he had been outsnapped by Bucky Irving, 52 to 49% of the snaps. If we're going to be in a situation in which, again, Rachaad White doesn't find the end zone, we're screwed. But luckily, they do take on the Carolina Panthers, the 5th best matchup at the position. I'm going to anticipate a positive game script in which both Bucky Irving, Rachaad White running the ball, both finding success, and hopefully both finding the end zone once again. Moving on to our number 22. We have James Conner. Look, James Conner played 70% of the snaps against the Seahawks. So it wasn't a lack of overall, opportunity there. It was just a matter of the game script really getting out of hand. Now, his overall receiving contributions were fantastic, but his rushing game was terrible. 7 carries for 8 yards. I'm anticipating him to get back on track this week. And even though they do take on the Minnesota Vikings, and based on current DVOA, they are the most difficult matchup in terms of running the ball against their front 7, I would anticipate that James Conner is going to find himself a lot more potential touches within the rushing category in comparison to what we saw last week. They pretty much just held over all of his touches. It's going to be implemented within the matchup against Minnesota this week. I can assure you this. Moving on to our number 23, we have Rico Dowdle. Look, week 12 was the most touches that we have seen from Rico Dowdle since week 5. Again, 22 total touches is no joke, 19 on the ground. Even though he fumbled in the late in the first quarter, he was not punished. Usually, we have coaching staffs where if a player fumbles, they send him to the bench and they don't utilize him for the remainder of the game. I don't know why people do that to professional running backs. It'll always confuse me. But going into this week, again, considering the trust that they have with Rico Dowdle, the volume of touches they continue to give him, and the fact that they were in a positive game script that entire game against the Washington Commanders, or at least it was a close enough game in terms to where they could continue to run the ball, anticipate something very similar against the New York Giants, as this is going to be not only advantageous matchup, this is the best matchup at the running back position, allowing over 5 yards per carry, over 21 fantasy points per game on the ground. We just most recently saw Tampa Bay running backs run for 127 and 3 rushing touchdown. Carolina, 158 and a touchdown. Washington, 114 and a touchdown. Pittsburgh ran for 160 rushing yards against the Giants. Expect Rico Dowdle to find immediate success within the Thursday night matchup. Moving on to our number 24, Tyrone Tracy. Within the same game, I still do believe that Tyrone Tracy is going to be hyper-relevant, even though he did end up fumbling early in that game and did get a goal line rushing attempt stolen from him by, Devin Singletary. That did lead to a rushing touchdown. I do anticipate this game to continue to lend more opportunity to Tyrone Tracy. I don't know who's going to be playing quarterback for the New York Giants, considering Tommy DeVito is currently still dealing with a forearm injury. If it's Drew Lock, it's even better. But either way, the check down game and the overall receiving upside is still going to be there for Tyrone Tracy. Hopefully, because this is going to be a little bit of a closer matchup and the Dallas Cowboys aren't going to immediately pull away, it will lead to more rushing attempts for Tyrone Tracy. In games in which he's given like 15 plus rushing attempts, he continues to deliver. We're hoping that he's going to find that overall level of success, considering the Cowboys are such an advantageous matchup at the position. Moving on to our number 25, Rhamondre Stevenson. It was a surprise to me to see that Rhamondre Stevenson, this most recent performance, was outsnapped by Gibson, but it does make sense considering the overall game script. Considering they were down 30 points at one point to the Miami Dolphins, it really just lended to the offense switching the running back position in order to get more receiving utilization out of Gibson instead of having to run the ball. There's a reason why Rhamondre Stevenson only had 8 rushing attempts within the game. But now that they do take on the Indianapolis Colts this week, I would anticipate to see a far more healthier potential game script in which we are able to take advantage of the matchup, the 8th best at the position, allowing 4.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Again, we have seen running backs go for over 80 rushing yards and a touchdown in each of the last 5 games against the Colts defense. I'd anticipate Rhamondre Stevenson to find himself success, hopefully under the assumption that the game script doesn't get out of hand. Moving on to our number 26, we have Isiah Pacheco, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders this week. Now, again, I don't know whether or not he's going to play, but based on the words that we heard earlier today from the Chiefs offensive coordinator, he specifically said that they're going to determine the overall workload between him and Kareem Hunt in game. So that kind of gives me an idea that he's going to play, but as to how much he's going to play, to be determined. It sounds like, again, we're probably going to be in a situation in which Isiah Pacheco is most likely going to have the majority of the touches, but if he doesn't find himself in the end zone, I mean, Kareem Hunt hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in the last 3 weeks. If he doesn't find himself in the end zone, he's not going to be as valuable of a fantasy option. Going back to week 8 against Las Vegas, Kareem Hunt had 12 carries for 59 and a touchdown for 12.8 fantasy points. We're hoping for that kind of level of production. Hopefully, Isiah Pacheco, given the volume of opportunity he requires and the opportunity specifically down near the goal line, to find himself fantasy upside. Moving on to our number 27, we have Najee Harris, who as of late, in the last 5 games, is averaging 18 touches per game. But in terms of overall efficiency, hasn't been up there in terms of his overall effectiveness. But as we continue, we take on the Bengals this week. Again, the Bengals have given up their fair share of fantasy points to opposing running backs. The fact of the matter is, as long as Najee Harris continues to see himself a volume of 18 plus touches in the last 5 games, if that volume continues to persist, all we need is a rushing touchdown, and he's a double-digit point player within the upcoming performance. Then we move on to Gus Edwards, another one of these players that is going to be filling in for an injured running back. Unfortunately, last night, J.K. Dobbins did sustain a knee injury. In the event in which J.K. Dobbins is not available to play this week, I would like to say that Gus Edwards is not only the priority pickup in terms of the waiver wire, but also someone that you can start this week in the absence of J.K. Dobbins. Of course, Gus Edwards will be taking over all the rushing workload within this offense, which Dobbins has presented over the course of the season, can range anywhere between, let's say, 12 to 20 touches within a singular game, especially in a positive game script. If Gus Edwards is going to continue to be given the workload of opportunity down near the goal line, you'd anticipate that Gus Edwards can find himself 10 plus fantasy points within the upcoming game. Just don't expect any receiving impact to be made. Therefore, in a full PPR, a lesser option. Moving on to our number 29, we have DeAndre Swift. Speaking of a full PPR, if in fact this is going to be a game in which the Detroit Lions, as they typically do, come out, take an early lead, and force the opposing offense to throw for majority of the game, anticipate DeAndre Swift to benefit from that fact. Because again, we want him to get the receiving workload because quite frankly, within the rushing category for touchdowns, within the red zone, it is the Roschon Johnson show. DeAndre Swift would have to break out a 30-yard rushing touchdown in order to find himself in the end zone. But hopefully the receiving upside can get himself to a balanced overall position within a negative game script to be a solid overall top 30 player within the upcoming performance. All right, moving on to our number 30, we have Jaylen Warren. Look, in the last 5 games, just in the same way in which we have seen Najee Harris getting himself 18 plus touches every game, in the last 5 games, Jaylen Warren averaging 11 attempts per game, 3.4 targets per game, and 9.0 fantasy points per game with Russell Wilson. He's been significantly more efficient than Najee Harris throughout that span of time. Najee Harris only averaging 3.93 yards per carry, while Jaylen Warren averaging 4.4 yards per carry. And as long as he's going to be the preferred receiving back and also give himself opportunities to score rushing touchdowns near the goal line, if these opportunities are going to continue to build, he will be that much more of a relevant option as we continue for the remainder of the season. Moving on to our number 31, we have Tank Bigsby. Look, taking on the Houston Texans is an advantageous matchup. They're allowing 11 fantasy points per game, but over 4 yards per carry. Earlier this year in week 5, in which the Jaguars took on the Houston Texans, the backfield contributions of Bigsby and ETN combined for 140 rushing yards. So if we're going to be in a situation in which Trevor Lawrence is back and Tank Bigsby is back from his ankle injury after the bye, we'd anticipate him to find success and hopefully find the end zone this week. Moving on to our number 32. Speaking of finding the end zone, if it wasn't for the 2 attempts near the goal line, Nick Chubb doesn't find himself much success. Over the course of the season, he's pretty much been a 5 to 6 point player because that's the yardage he gets. Outside of scoring a touchdown, he is not going to get himself much receiving utilization. Against the Denver Broncos, it isn't an easy matchup, but we're going to have to hope that, of course, Nick Chubb finds himself in the end zone because this offense is typically throwing the ball 40 plus times per game outside of a heavy snow game. Moving on to our number 33, we have Jeremy McNichols, who could be an immediate pickup and play in the absence of Bijan Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler. Obviously, Bijan Robinson Jr., leg injury, Austin Eckler concussion protocol. The Commanders running backs from weeks 1 through 12 are averaging 21 attempts per game on the ground and 4.75 targets per game. That's a 22.89 fantasy point per game average over the course of this season. If Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez Jr. are going to be able to contribute to this backfield going into the week, we'd anticipate McNichols to be the primary RB1, primarily because over the course of this season, he's averaging 4.93 yards per carry, which is number 9 amongst all running backs with a minimum of 40 rushing attempts, and a 3.43 yards after contact per attempt average, which is number 11 amongst all running backs within the category. We'd anticipate Jeremy McNichols to run away with a job and find himself a lot of success even against the Tennessee Titans this week. Moving on to our number 34, Ameer Abdullah. Again, in the event in which Jahmyr White and, of course, Alexander Mattison are going to miss, considering they're playing on Friday, the anticipation would be that Ameer Abdullah will continue to sustain the RB1 role of this offense, playing 68% of the snaps in Week 12. The RB2 being McCormick was very much so a surprise, but either way, just led to more opportunities in the direction of Ameer Abdullah. Getting himself all the receiving workload is all that matters. Finding himself in the end zone certainly was able to lift his overall upside, but even if he doesn't find the end zone, when you're able to come away from this game with 65 total yards and 5 catches, that is still valuable enough. Earlier this season, when the Raiders took on the Chiefs back in Week 8, they only scored 8.4 fantasy points as a combined backfield because they only ran the ball for 16 rushing yards on 17 rushing attempts. I wouldn't expect much on the ground for Ameer Abdullah, but as long as he's getting himself his utilization through the air, expect success. Moving on to our number 35, we have Javonte Williams. Look, the fact of the matter is, taking on the Cleveland Browns isn't the problem. It's just purely a matter of this backfield not finding efficiency and a high volume of opportunity for their running backs. It is a running back by committee by every sense of the word. Outside of a touchdown or incredible receiving upside, it's going to be a pretty tough situation to start, Javonte Williams within the upcoming matchup. Moving on to our number 36, Kareem Hunt. We don't know how much he's going to play. We do know he is going to play alongside of Pacheco. It's just going to be purely a matter of who's going to be given the vast majority of touches. We would assume in the return of Isiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt will be the RB2, and in that overall circumstance, won't find himself as much potential for upside. Moving on to our number 37, we have Travis Etienne. Look, the fact of the matter is, Travis Etienne is going to continue to get himself opportunity within this backfield, even if Tank Bigsby comes back and is healthy. But the overall opportunity share is going to lead to Travis Etienne primarily benefiting from receiving workload. Outside of that kind of situation, he's not going to be the primary goal line back, and nor is he going to be the primary rusher if there's a healthy Tank Bigsby, because we've witnessed that earlier this season. So pretty much his role is what Ameer Abdullah is expected to do. Hopefully find himself 5 or 6 rushing attempts, 5 or 6 receptions. If both those things can occur, he should be solid. Moving on to our number 38, Tyjae Spears. Very similar to Travis Etienne in the idea in which he's going to get himself about, maybe 8 to 10 touches. If he's going to be efficient with them, he will be highly valuable. Outside of that situation, taking on the Washington Commanders, again, is a very advantageous matchup, but Tony Pollard is the preferred back of the two by a vast majority. Moving on to our number 39, Chris Rodriguez Jr. Again, we're going to see Jeremy McNichols be the primary number 1 in the absence of Eckler and Bijan Robinson Jr., but don't expect, him to have the entire workload of opportunity. Chris Rodriguez Jr. is going to get rushing attempts. Of course, the quarterback, Jayden Daniels, is going to get rushing attempts, and they're all going to contribute within the overall matchup. Moving on to our number 40 to close out today's video, we have Roschon Johnson. Again, as long as he's implicated to continue to score touchdowns, has scored 6 rushing touchdowns in the last 8 games, he could very easily come away with 6 to 10 fantasy points in any given week because of his overall opportunity share. All he needs is one opportunity on the goal line, and he'll find success. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my Week 13 running back rankings at a top 40 capacity. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to go ahead and comment down below, or go ahead and swing on by later tonight starting at 7 p.m. I will be live streaming here on the channel. If you want your unlimited questions answered, you can always check out Patreon. Links down in the description, where I answer unlimited questions, rankings every Thursday, and, of course, Sunday morning. All that kind of content available there for those of you interested. Thank you very much for watching, and until later tonight, I'll see you guys. Peace.